Welcome Gratitude Diary readers. I'm here with Dr. Jimmy Wollumbin, and he wrote the article Ending the Gender War Within. Thank you for being here today, Jimmy.
Absolute pleasure.
Dr. Jimmy is actually a doctor of Chinese medicine, not a Chinese doctor of medicine. What inspired you to want to study Chinese medicine rather than westernized medicine?
My first degree was in philosophy, and I found that philosophy meant Western philosophy, and so to get a broader perspective on philosophy, I had to study Asian studies, and that's where I got all the philosophy of people like Confucius and Lao Tzu, and Vedantic philosophy and Zen and all of those things, and that provided me with a deep and abiding love of philosophy, of the love of wisdom. And then on the other side of that, I just wanted to go travelling and go to all of those places, but I also wanted a trade, and I wanted a way to practice philosophy. And so for me, medicine has always been the practice of philosophy. And so it's a way to put all those ideas into practice. It's a kind of lived, medicine as lived philosophy.
As opposed to the practice of medicine,
Yeah.
and then applying philosophy to medicine, it's actually the opposite.
The other way
medicine
around.
Becomes the practice of philosophy.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, there's a long historical tradition behind that as well.
Beautiful. So in the article, which I've read about a dozen times, you've written in the first paragraph that, I'll just read it out for you guys, it's lovely. We most surely cannot allow all that our fathers disowned to be lost to us. And I believe that this is no less true for women. Do you feel that the father-son connection is, I guess, as tenuous as the father-daughter connection? In other words, as men, we may not have had perfect fathers, and therefore we can, I guess, not develop because of that. But is that equally true for women and their father relationship?
Well, one, as you said, I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, not a psychologist or a Jungian therapist, so I need to qualify everything that I say against that backdrop. Yep. I'm Jimmy.
Yep.
And two, as a therapist, one of the wonderful things that you see is that just as many people have issues with either parent. Just as many men have deep trauma from their mothers as men that have deep trauma from their fathers, and just as many women have deep trauma from their mothers as have deep trauma from their fathers.
Yes.
And so that's a wonderful sort of leveling of the playing field a little bit in that regard as a therapist. When you're like, okay, which parent is it? Where were you not met? Yes. And there's no way to predict it by gender.
No.
There's no way.
No, because a lot of people just use that throwaway line, a man, he's got mother issues, and a woman has got father issues, and there we are in the melding pit of those two things. But really, that's quite a generalised way of looking at things, isn't it?
I think so. I think at times, you can really see some of what, you could see in a man where he was predominantly the deep wounding of his relationship to his father, and to pick a cliche that, his father never accepted him, nothing was ever good enough, la la la. And so that's what is driving so much of his behaviour in the world, and that's what's impacting his marriage and his relationship to the feminine as well, is that whole piece and that whole wound.
Yes.
And the same with a woman, that the way in which she was not nurtured by her mother, perhaps, or nothing was ever good enough for her mother.
Yes.
And her mother was just always excessively critical, or there's a range of different ways. It goes every way you can imagine.
Yeah.
And that's what's driving them. So I think it's wonderful to look at that relationship to the contrasexual parent, but...
What was that word you just used?
Contrasexual.
Contrasexual.
The parent of the opposite gender.
I've never heard that word before. Isn't that an amazing word?
Yeah.
Did you make that word up?
No, we'll get to it later when we're talking about marrying the contrasexual self.
Okay, perhaps. I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. What was your motivation in writing and addressing this beautiful but deep and sharky issue of the balance of the masculine and feminine in relationship? What motivated you personally to want to look at this?
Good question. Because speaking about gender at all in the 21st century is bound to upset and offend somebody. And so it's there's a kind of a gagging that happens around this because there's nothing that you can say that won't offend somebody. So I was aware of that when writing it, but at a personal level, I found myself at a men's gathering with 100 other men in an initiatory process at the age of 20 or 21, and that opened up for me the world of men's business, and the world of gender as a possibility for personal transformation and spiritual development. You know, that otherwise I sort of read, you know, just we're all souls, you know, and our journey is as a soul, and that's a wonderful piece as well. You know, it takes you some way. But there's another one which is like, well, if you identify as a man in this way, if you've been socialized in this way, which is, you know, only a set of people, then there are particular initiations there's particular myths, there's particular gods, there's particular archetypes at work in you.
Actually, I'm reminded of the archetype. I'll put my glasses on so I can't see it. You've mentioned the archetype of the Apollyon rule-making sky father or god like king, like Saturn. So you've mentioned the Apollyon. Can you tell me a little bit about what the archetype of Apollo and what he kind of stands for?
Yep. So there's 1,000 different archetypes for each gender. And so that's the important thing, is that there's not just one or two.
Yes.
You know, there's a whole bunch of them. And we tend to forget that, but the mythology is full of all that sort of stuff. And it's important to remember that they're all in there. It's not just like women are just Gaia and men are just Zeus. It's just like, well, there's the male trickster, there's the feminine Hecate, the crone. There's a plethora of them, and so that's important to remember. We can't reduce gender to a single archetype. No, we can't at all.
No. But he does feature quite strongly, doesn't he? In that very stern no, you know, that masculine no, that sword that comes down, that's really quite hard and can just kind of cut off from, you know, relating and relationships, and just boom, bring that down.
I guess there's a lot in there. So in one way, there's a role in society from monkey troops on up of a loving, good patriarch. And in monkey troops, in functional monkey troops, we've got this thing where the boy monkeys do this amount of grooming, right, and caring for each other. And the girl monkeys do, you know, the female monkeys do this much more than the boy monkeys. But the one that does the most far and above is the patriarch. The alpha male in a stable troop is the most grooming and the most nurturing and the most caring.
Oh, wow.
And cares for the whole troop.
Yes.
And that's how come he ends there, in the same way that the Native American chief with that big long feather piece, each one of those is a white feather as a gift from someone of like, you have just saved my life, or you've done this wonderful thing to me. Yes. And it's through service that he's arisen to that position.
I see. So he's holding the most love.
Yes, and the most service.
The most service.
And so the essence of the good king, which is the archetype that comes out of that starts off before us, is the one of greatest service, not to himself, but to the realm, to the entire community. And for a stable monkey troop, that's what happens. Because you get despotic monkeys that are alpha males that get there through violence, but they don't last that long. No. Because as tough as they are, there's just, finally, you just need two other tough monkeys, maybe three, and they're going to take him out. So despotic systems don't last.
Yes, I see.
And so that's built into biology, and it's built into our culture as well. So there's all these stories that say, what's the good king? And then little boys, in a range of ways, one of the stories that they're suckled on is how to be King Arthur. You know, the good king. Yes. It's one of the stories that's inside that. And what does it mean? So
not a better archetype, but perhaps a more fitting archetype for a man who wants to be a leader in this world at this time would be someone who is more in service to the realm.
In service of something greater than himself.
Ned Stark from Game of Thrones.
There we go. That's right. There's definitely that piece, right?
Yes.
Whereas the Dark King the despot, is there. It's in every man. It's in every woman as well in a different way. We'll get to that.
Yes.
But it's there, and it's older than humanity. It's a pattern of behaviour that's there. It's older than mammals, I would suggest, but it's definitely there.
Yes. Yeah.
And that is power over rather than to empower, and it's in service of me.
Yes. So what was that word you used? The dark masculine?
The dark king. We can call it all sorts of different things.
Okay.
The good king or the dark king.
Yep.
And he's a despot.
And he's a self-serving king.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's in service of himself,
Yes.
not something larger than himself.
Yes.
But can very much rise to the top of the pyramid.
Yes.
In human societies and in monkey societies.
Yes.
But the thing that we've learnt through all our stories as well is that you won't last in that way.
No.
It doesn't. If
No.
you're only in service of yourself, sooner or later you come to a not nice end.
Because it's kind of about self-preservation and preserving the ego structure rather than about serving the realm.
That's right. And you're actually, it's more secure to be in service of the community, in social beings like this, and in caring for others and being in service of the realm. Then that is the greatest. That means that when you're down, when you don't have food, when the troop is running and you're left behind, they'll come back for you and they'll find food for you and they'll find shelter for you.
Beautiful.
Because we're inside a structure like that. And so little boys are socialized in a range of different ways, in the same way that little boy monkeys are socialized in a range of different ways, and that the hormone testosterone we used to think it was about aggression, but it's not really about aggression. It's about social hierarchies.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's got this so it's inside our biology, and so when we think, what is that thing that's inside our biology? Now we understand that testosterone is about that process.
Yes.
Then it's like, it's bigger than us, it's older than us, it's older than mammals, it's like a god.
Yeah.
It is, because it moves us in the same way that your hormones are like a god.
Yes.
They're bigger than you.
Absolutely.
Really,
Absolutely.
And so that archetype is bigger than us, and that's one of them. Yes. And we can align with the better one, and we'll probably be better off. And so it's in service.
Yes. Yeah. So it's about alignment and aligning to the realm, and aligning to the service of the whole and the good of the whole, rather than just what my personal needs are.
That's right.
Beautiful.
And then the part that you referenced that comes inside that mythology as well is that they're, despite being in service of the realm, being in service of something greater means the necessity to say no to a range of lesser things. And so that's this conversation around the sacred no.
The sacred no.
In a way. And so it says, no, I won't.
Yes.
I won't
Yes.
Lose my honour for that. No, I won't allow you to be less than yourself.
Yes, yes. And that is the appropriate use of the sacred no.
Absolutely.
I'm reading your words here. Men's deep distrust of women is actually a distrust of the mysterious feminine depths of their own souls.
Yes, so another piece inside that. If we want to play this game, which is a game that's fraught with peril, of putting gender on things that don't have gender. Like, nature is feminine, society is masculine. Yes. Fraught with peril, and bound to blind us and get us into so much trouble in so many ways. Because it's a game, and what the things are that you think that they really are like that, you're like, but the moon, it's more feminine, because it just really, really is. For most of our ancestors, for most of the time, the moon was masculine. And the sun was feminine. So we've got to remember when we play these games, before I say anything about anything in that regard, that they're not hard, fast rules.
Of course. But what I do notice is that those no's that can be, the sword that comes down, can be used as a protection against the inner feminine that wants to feel, that wants to have some emotional movement on the inside, but because it's not been encouraged in society, for the strong masculine to have deep emerging feelings, that perhaps sometimes the ego can come up, and that no is made against the self on an internal level.
Potentially, yes. Potentially. It can be made as if a man who identifies as masculine is aligning with this particular archetype,
Yes.
which is only if, because he could be aligning with the Dionysian.
Yes.
He could be aligning with the green man. He could
Ned.
be aligning with all sorts of different things,
With
right?
Ned Stark.
Yeah, with Ned Stark,
Yeah.
with the lover, with the magician, with the mage. There's a whole bunch of things that men can align with.
Yeah, yeah.
And the good king is only one of them.
Yes.
But if he would, then what tends to go with that is the view, the view that's necessary to be able to see the entire realm. The distance that's necessary requires getting up on top of that pyramid, like the eye.
Yeah.
And so it means getting up that distance on myself as well.
Yes.
And looking, it's like, well, I really want to give the bananas to my mate over there because he's my mate. But actually the ones that need the bananas are those children over there. And so there's a distance required in service of the realm of perspective that tends to then divorce itself from my own emotional processes.
The witness.
That's right. And so it drives in that direction, and that can be a wonderful thing, right? It can be it's a very necessary thing. Without that, in the complete absence of that, then one can find oneself drowning in emotional storms.
Yes.
Absolutely, just and so and that's for both genders. You know, that can happen.
Yes.
But in excess, then that consciousness, and consciousness is just a thin layer on top of the unconscious. Then that consciousness all by itself, and that distance all by itself, including from our own deep well of the unconscious, becomes arid and dry and like a desert. And as a man, I feel that at times of like, I have practiced this art of logos, of consciousness in this particular way, of aligning in those ways.
Would you call it disconnected?
No, it's not disconnection.
What is it?
It's connection with one pole.
I see.
It's a connection with one pole.
One pole.
And so the disconnection piece is because of an alignment of value with the other pole. Emotion is good, mind is bad. But that's not the case.
No, not at all.
No, not at all. Balance is good.
Yes.
Balance is good.
Yes.
And so, but it can result in disconnection from the other pole of the unconscious and of the emotional realm.
Yes.
And unless the unconscious and the deep, watery world of, that all the way that goes down there, the part of us that dreams, the part of us that produced alchemy, the part of us that produces all art and all myth,
Creates.
all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
And also the part that swallows us in madness.
Yes.
Also the part that swallows us in anxiety and neuroticism.
Yes.
If we don't have access to that as men, then life's a sort of barren desert of order and mind. And so you really need to be able to touch that. And so,
that creative tap has just been turned off, and there's no access to it.
to the unconscious, to all of those waters. And so because the unconscious is full of chaos as well, and the pole that we're aligned with is around the value and good of order, because order is what maintains the realm.
So when we turn that off, not only are we turning off the chaos and the confusion, but we're also turning off what feeds us and what informs us.
The muse. All of that it's all in there. All sorts of devils, all sorts of demons, all sorts of terrors of the deep. All the madness and all the that's inside you is all in there. And all of that chaos, but so is the genius. Right? And so again, since we're speaking about the masculine, the necessity, on the one hand, there's a particular thing that says, practice the art of gaining distance, of coming up here, and not being thrown around by those tides, to be able to look with the eye of the eagle, look like that, like Zeus, up high, with a particular distance from myself and that roiling ocean. Do that in service of something greater than yourself. What I want is, I want her, or I want that, or I want, I want these things. But in this moment, we're up here. But then the danger is, as I described, and the danger on top of it is for men then, if you end up also just holding the sacred no. And so in a family, we can often just need to take roles, right? And these roles can be taken in any different way. And so sometimes the mother is the holder of the sacred no, and the father is the holder of the sacred yes.
So give me an example of when a man has turned his creative tap off and he's using his sacred no actually against himself. Give me an example of how he can use that no, not to turn the tap off, but to let that open, but then use that no on the stormy sea, in the boat that's getting tipped over. What's a good example of how to use that sacred no on the run, on the go?
Wow, I'm not sure. It's no, I will not allow myself to become an empty husk. No, I will not lose this precious part of myself. No, I will not do this to those I love by becoming this. But it's also, the balance is around finding the sacred yes. And so as in my family, as an example, we followed these fairly typical roles in a whole bunch of ways, and not everyone does. But I've been providing and earning money, and my wife has been nurturing, taking care of the hearth in all of these ways. And then I found with that, because to nurture is to say yes. It's like, oh yes, I'll wake up in the middle of the night for the third time and come to you. Yes, you can come to my bosom again. Yes. And so with all of that yes, then it keeps going.
Can I quote you in here?
Yeah, you quote me.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. I resonated with this. She gives of her heart blood unstintingly. She constantly serves love, both cosmic and earthly, and her gift is of the sacred. Yes, I can accept you just the way you are. I totally resonated with that, because that, for me as a woman, that is what love does.
Yes.
It totally says, yes, all of you, I'm totally a yes for the whole thing.
Yeah.
But there's perils in that.
What happens if it has no boundary?
No boundaries.
Yes, we can have another cat. Yes, we can have another cat. And yes, they can have kittens. And yes, you can watch that program. And yes, you can have some more sweets. I don't want to say no, you want sweets. Yes, you can stay up. Yes, sweetheart, yes, whatever you want, yes. And you have these terrible little Nazis.
Yeah.
A terrible thing to do to a child
Yes.
is to only give it one of those poles.
Yes.
And a terrible thing to a woman is to only align her with that voice. Possessed by that god, that goddess, she will soon enough, at that point, her breast will become dry, like emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah.
She will have given, because like, oh, can you do this thing for me? Great. Can you do this other thing for me? Great. Will you pick that? Will you take care of that? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The martyr.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Until where does it go to? It goes to then, it flips to a no.
Yeah.
But it's not the good king that they flip to.
No.
It's the dark.
It's the dark feminine.
It's the dark
It's
feminine.
rage,
So then, absolutely. So then there's a
Yeah.
no, but it's in service of self.
Yes.
It's an angry, wounded no.
Yes.
No, I won't do this, and it comes out, and it's because, but that was built. What built that was the unbridled, sacred yes.
Yes.
And so that's the thing for the feminine to be able to understand as well. Is like, by disowning the good king within, by disowning the tough but fair boundary maker, then she herself piles up inside her resentments upon resentments upon resentments until she will then be possessed by the witch, to the detriment of all.
Yes.
And we don't say like, oh, witch, like, yeah, you go girl, that's your Kali. It's not actually to be glorified in that way. It's a wounded,
It's
angry
a wounded,
place
angry woman.
that wants to wound others and gain power and revenge.
Yeah.
It's a dark place. It's not a good thing. Same as the despot. It's not a good thing.
It's not good.
No. And we see a lot of that. Like, they both really happen,
Look,
right?
I can totally relate. I grew up in a family structure where I had very little boundaries, and as a result, I developed this really fondness of freedom, my own personal freedom. But as my freedom expands and expands, I find myself looking for that sense of structure and that sense of boundaries in a man.
Yes.
Because I'm thinking that, oh, okay, once I align with a man, then I will be able to have that no. Because I'm desperately wanting that no. I'm desperately wanting that sense of, this is my structure, this is my realm,
Yes.
and this is how I can operate in. But what you're saying is it's not that we have to cultivate those things outside of ourselves. We actually need to cultivate that sacred inner no inside.
Marry that opposite deity within, the balancing, there's a yin and a yang there.
Yes.
And so for both genders,
Yeah.
then, and this is where Jung said, like, for men, there's an aspect which he called of the soul, which was the disowned feminine, because we socialise men in a particular way. But where we're, you know, from one perspective, we're consciousness. You know, we're larger than the way in which we're socialized. And the socialization process for men just says like, well, all this other stuff, just, that's not okay. Whatever it is, you know? You know, your, you know, vulnerability, not okay. All of these sorts of things, they all sort of go somewhere. And where do they go? Then they go into, you know, somewhere else that there's disowned. And the same for women. It's like to be socialized as a woman is just like to cultivate anything, to say yes to anything is to say no to something else. And so where does all that thing that's said, that we as a culture have said no to for both of them, it goes into a part. And that in men is called the anima. It's the feminine soul within, and in women it's the animus, the masculine soul within. And the process of spiritual growth, according to Jung, who drank deeply from the waters of the alchemists, is to marry the contrasexual self. And so around about the middle of life, then typically that part you start to feel one way or another the absence of that thing. And so ways in which that can come up is that women can then, at that particular point, having, if they've followed a traditional pathway, which not all women do, and they have identified with the Demeter-like Earth Mother, which not all women do, and they have taken care of the social, emotional hearth realm of reproduction and family, which not all women do, then around that time, then the owning of the inner patriarch, the owning of the part that is really concerned with societal structures and out in the world comes to the fore, and you have women who's like, I want to make my own business. I want to make a name for myself. I want to do something. I want to contribute to society. And I want to be out there. And I want to do well. And I want to be acknowledged for doing well. And I want mastery in this thing.
I want to embody my masculine part.
That part, right? You know, and it's not even masculine, it's only masculine insofar as we sort of socialised us in this particular way, but it's older than socialisation because there's biological parts behind it that go back before humans. It's not just a construct.
And could that also be in that particular time that you mentioned, the middle of life, you know, is that all? I just got a sense of, you know, this longing that I sometimes feel, you know, for some sort of kind of, you know, merging or union, and then the tendency is to project that outside of myself and think that is a longing for, you know, a male counterpart. But really, what I'm perhaps feeling is that longing really is for the merging of my sacred inner masculine.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it is. But there's a qualifier there, and the qualifier that I have is that. That if you just externalize that, then you continue to be married and polarized only with the one pole that was just getting a bit old. It was getting tyrannical. It's being the Earth Mother and only the Earth Mother. It's like, well, who wants to do that? There's a constellation of feminine deities that you can embody, and a constellation of masculine bodies deities that you can embody. And so to be forced into a small box, or to be possessed by one god or goddess only, is a tyranny. And if you marry only that deity outside, you outsource it and you say, here, Jimmy, you hold that for me in my life. And I'll keep staying on in this particular, possessed by this particular set of values, and I'll fundamentally only get to experience that vicariously through you. At some point, you're still going to be like, I'm kind of bought this t-shirt. It's a good t-shirt, but I'm done. I'm cooked.
It's a law of attraction relationship, isn't it? Where you hold those parts for me and I'll hold these parts for you, and together we'll make it into the world. But essentially we're playing our roles in that. I think that's an old paradigm. What's the new one?
Well, the part that I was going to add is that so there is danger in outsourcing those things to someone else completely. There is danger in the simplistic way in which we, in the new age, have a notion of I will be whole unto myself only, and take all of these ideas that we're talking about, all of these stories, and say, well, I just, I must finish this journey solo. And that's necessary before I can have love. And that we all should necessarily both be androgynous beings that have perfectly balanced out all of these things within ourselves. And that's unattainable for most of us.
Yeah, it's not realistic.
And it's not realistic as well. So I think there's a place for doing exactly the thing that I just cautioned against.
Yes.
Is that somebody else is able to hold something, and in that then there's a transfer.
Yes.
And that you start to be able to, it empowers and you hold that.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And so...
Yeah, and maybe sometimes the new paradigm is that sometimes consciously I can say, look, my feminine is melting, can you hold the stave for me at this particular time? And then another time you might say, you know what, I'm going to give you back the sword right now because I just really need to go into my feeling body and feel through some stuff. And maybe it's a passing of the batons where I'm not identifying myself as the feminine depth of creativity, and you're not identifying with the sword, but we just have these tools that we can play with and we can share with one another, as long as we're conscious enough to be able to articulate what's needed, what our needs are in any given moment.
Yeah. I asked a gay friend once about polarity within a same-sex marriage or relationship, and in relation to all of these things that we're saying. And he said one of the things that he thought was really good is that there was greater freedom to be able to switch polarities without fundamentally disturbing the relationship.
That sounds beautiful. Can you say that again?
That in same-sex relationships, his experience was that there was greater freedom to be able to switch polarities without fundamentally disrupting the structure and stability of the relationship. And so, whereas potentially in our marriage, if I say, listen, I need you to hold all this stuff that I've been holding, and I want to go over here in this particular way, then it's possible that in order to do that, we may need a divorce. It's it could be too disruptive unless both parties are willing to do it. And that often happens, especially around this time when the marrying of the contrasexual self takes place.
And I'm just even getting a sense of that it can happen without words. If you're operating in somebody's field, a lot, you can actually start to intuit where someone's sitting in terms of their energy body, and therefore, you should be able to sense your beloved if they're feeling wobbly. Therefore, you kind of, develop a backbone in that moment, and vice versa. Do you find that happens in your relationship? You can sense?
I found that the poles that we adopted when my wife got pregnant were quite gender normative, quite traditional, and there was reasons behind it as well. I had the capability to dial up my providing and income earning, and she was about to give birth and be breastfeeding. There's biological imperatives here, right? And so we followed that, and then taking on those roles then possess you. They then dial up, right? And so we took very quite normal roles, and it was a decade or so later that we've been married 12 years, so it's relatively recent, that we both sort of started to approach that midpoint, and it started to mix up a bit, and we found it mixing up in a range of different ways in our relationship, energetically, emotionally, sexually, and then pragmatically in some ways as well. So I think that's quite a normal, a normal, not normative, but a common trajectory. Even though there's a large number of people that take different paths.
So just in summary, the sacred no in terms of the masculine, to use that no as a loving boundary in service of the whole, rather than as an internal boundary inside of self. So rather than say no to the inner feminine, say yes to the inner feminine, sacred yes to the inner feminine, but then use that no to protect the whole, to protect the realm.
So what I would add to that is that yes, the sacred no is a form of male nurture, and it should be lovingly given again and again, really. And I saw this, just to give you a real practical example of this. I saw a man on the beach, a father, at Byron by the playground, and his 4-year-old daughter was hanging from a branch in a tree that she'd climbed, and she was hanging by her hands, and she's like, "Daddy, catch me, catch me." He's like, "No, you're right." And her feet were about this far off the ground. She's like, "Please." He's like, "You're going to be okay, sweetheart." She's like, "Just catch me." He's like, "Bend your knees and drop. You can do it. You can do it." He's like, "Oh." He's like, "You can do it." "No, I won't catch you. No, I won't." But with love and encouragement. And she dropped, poof. And she was like, "Oh, oh, I did it. Daddy, I did it." Deep masculine nurture, deep nurture, right? And in that moment, potentially, you know, if you were aligned only with the sacred then you deny that daughter that wonderful opportunity there, right? So it's lovingly given in service of something greater, something higher, right, than that immediate process there. And so that no is given again and again and again, lovingly. And so we have to be cautious, because there's a sense that no is bad and yes is good. But yes, unbridled yes is cancer. And it also does not hold boundaries, your own and others. And so yes, okay, I'll do that. Yes, I'll do it, the other thing. And yes, I'll stay back later. And yes, okay, they can have my pay raise. And yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, until someone goes postal, right? And so excessively agreeable results is how the dark version of that comes. The dark king or the dark feminine, you know, the dark black. It breeds that. And so we definitely need that balance between the appropriateness of the sacred yes and sacred no, again and again. Okay,
I'll attempt to summarise the female understanding, and that is that when we have the unbridled yes, the martyr-like kind of behaviour, we continue just to say, yes, I love you unconditionally, I love you no matter what, and we don't provide any no's, then that can just leave us like a boat on the ocean without a rudder. And so for women to cultivate the sacred no, exactly the same as men cultivate the sacred no, but in a loving way and not in a shadowy way, which means, as you just said, no, I'm not going to catch you. No, I'm not going to rescue you. I'm going to let you have that experience. But I'm also saying no to that part of myself that is completely unbridled. But in other words, yes, I'm going to take care of you. So that would be the yes in the healthy way.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and it's much easier said than done. And at the moment, I feel that there's a very significant, and there has been a significant arising of the sacred no and the no full stop within the feminine. And so much of that is so good, so necessary and so healthy. You know, thank the goddess. And so much of that is so shadowy as well. And so it's very easy to just to flip from one, from an excess of the way in which you're socialized and what you've taken on, and the goddesses that you have aligned with, or that have been aligned for you with all of this way, that disown that, right? But then the tendency is to flip to a shadowy version of it. And I see that a lot in the New Age, and I see it a lot in women of the New Age as well. And so it can feel, so I would say the practice and the cultivation of what that is to be done on both sides as we approach the disowned with caution, with compassion, and with consciousness on both sides, because it's hard. So many of these things are easier said than done.
Look, we're taking the lid off a huge can of worms. Talking about the dynamics between men and women on the planet, and it's as we were saying earlier, it's very rare that you can even have a conversation at a dinner party about the roles of men and the roles of women without somebody getting emotionally triggered and reactive. And yet the conversations need to be had, because my feeling is we're in such a mess. How can we move forward in a conscious way if we don't take the lid off what needs to be looked at and what needs to be explored, with strategies on how to manage what arises once that lid has been taken off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes so much larger than the issues that we're talking about, because the way in which our culture is bipolar, has been polarized and continues to be polarized. Politically, left and right swinging further and further away from each other politically into increasingly dysfunctional and crazy versions of each other. And the arts and the sciences and the humanities, our left brain and our right brain, that the hierogamos, the sacred marriage, is we can think of it as a union between masculine and feminine, but it's a union between so many different parts of ourselves that our culture desperately needs. It's a union between mythos and logos. It's a union between the boundary setting in service of tradition and the structure, right wing, and the equalising in service of distributing resources, left wing. That says, no, we won't let that, where that boundary must be held. And that says, no, yes, this is the time to soften that boundary.
Yes.
And that there's no hard and fast rule over when we do those things. And so the journey is, we can't wait around for that to happen externally. It can only take place through a series of individuals that have married those poles within them, that have the systole and diastole of consciousness, of mythos and logos within, the masculine and feminine within, the sacred no and the sacred yes, the unconscious and the conscious.
But let's break this down into how. It's one thing to have the understanding that this is what's needed for the balance of the masculine and feminine union within, but once you've made that decision to do that, what do you do?
Yeah, good question. So it's what you do, I think, is you begin by hopefully knowing that you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that you can't see your own lens.
No.
And that you are unconscious of your shadow.
Yes.
And anyone that says, I'm pretty aware of my shadow, it's like, run from them. No. Flee. Be very cautious.
It's not real.
It's not true. It's not true. No one's aware of the shadow.
It's not true.
The little parts of it, the less shadowy parts of it.
That's why it's called the shadow.
That's right. It's unconscious. I'm conscious of my unconscious. No, you're not. And you never will be. You never plumb its depths. So starting there, is the baseline and
it's
awareness of that.
It's a very humble place to start, isn't it? That
it's a humble
to say,
place.
I'm just beginning.
Yeah.
I'm just beginning to realise that I don't have all of the answers, because I don't have a mirror. I don't have my own reflection. I only have what I know and what I see, or what I choose to see. And
this is the beautiful thing of having a sacred mirror. And that sacred mirror could be your therapist, or that sacred mirror can be your partner. And when it is your partner, then it allows them, from being aligned and married to a different God, a different perspective, a different set of values, a different archetype, to be able to say, from that perspective, what I see of where your perspective is limited, where you need to loosen it. Well, I can see your lens, I can see your eyes.
Yes.
You can't. I can't see my eyes, but I can see yours. But you can see my eyes, and I can't see my eye, myself.
No.
And you can't see your eye.
No.
So to see the eye that sees requires a sacred mirror, and that's what can bring us perhaps to an actual union with another human being as well, which is a beautiful, beautiful way to see the possibility of human relationship, regardless of what gender, regardless of sexual orientation.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I can't see my eye. I can't, and in some ways, I need a mirror, as you say, whether it be the therapist or a beloved. I need a mirror because I can't see my eye. So then we're actually working in service of one another's eyes, for the good of the realm. So clearly, you're more than a doctor. You, as you say, you're a philosopher first, who practices Chinese medicine, not a Chinese doctor. philosopher who practices medicine. And so if people wanted to come and study more with you, how would they find you?
Well, they can follow me on Facebook. I have posts pretty much every day, like the one that you've found here. Or I have a website, which is drjimmy.com, doctorjimi.com. And there's a series of webinars and there's a series of opportunities there as well to be able to come and learn about all things medical and some additional pieces on top of that, like we've been discussing today.
Awesome. And if people wanted to read this amazing article, it's actually called Ending the Gender War Within. It's in the Gratitude Diary 2019, the month of August, www.givingthanks.com.au. Thank you for inviting us to Artemisia, which I'm also being made aware of that there's an abundance of Artemisia trees surrounding this beautiful healing centre in the northern rivers of New South Wales. Thank you so much. You can hear the birds outside.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, or are they bats?
They're bats, actually, from the dark side.
Oh my God, the dark family.
Yeah, mate, I don't know.
Great, thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah, pleasure.
Okay.